U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum doubled from 25% to 50% Wednesday after President Donald Trump announced the move last week, claiming the move would help protect the country's steel industry. In its announcement, the White House described the hike in tariffs as a move to counter, quote, trade practices that undermine national security. The White House added that Trump is acting to protect the U.S. steel and aluminum industry from harm and accused foreign nations of flooding the American market with, quote, cheap steel and aluminum often subsidized by their governments. After announcing the move, Trump wrote on his Truth Social platform, quote, our steel and aluminum industries are coming back like never before. This will be yet another big jolt of great news for our wonderful steel and aluminum workers.
Auto manufacturers are already warning of price hikes due to President Trump's 25% tariff on aluminum imports, and now tensions have escalated dramatically. On May 30, 2025, the Trump administration announced a major policy move, the doubling of tariffs on steel and aluminum imports to 50%. This sparked immediate concern across the border in Canada, which had previously hinted it might use oil as leverage. But now, Ottawa is considering the automotive industry as its next powerful card. What began as a conflict over metals and oil is now evolving into a broader trade war, targeting one of the most integrated sectors between the two countries: automotive manufacturing. Canada stands among the world's top producers of steel and aluminum, consistently ranking in the top 5 for aluminum and top 10 for steel. Trade in just these two sectors with the United States is valued at nearly $35 billion annually. For years, Canada has been the main supplier of both steel and aluminum to the United States, forming a vital part of the North American supply chain. But with Trump's protectionist turn, what was once a reliable partnership is now under serious threat. While the original 25% tariff drew backlash, both sides had continued negotiations, but the surprise jump to 50% was viewed as a direct attack. Trump celebrated the announcement alongside a new trade deal with Japan, but the shock in Canada was immediate and vocal. Canadian leaders didn't hold back. MP Tariff, whose region relies heavily on steel, called the tariffs arbitrary, illegal, and unjustified, warning that the decision would damage an already fragile relationship and raise costs on both sides of the border. Sheehan urged swift action to protect Canadian industry and jobs. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc echoed the frustration, saying Canada is, prepared to give more than the U.S. can take. He emphasized Ottawa's commitment to protecting Canadian workers and announced a summit with provincial premiers to coordinate nation-building infrastructure projects and prepare for strong retaliation. Canada has previously warned it could leverage its massive oil trade. It's actually the largest crude oil supplier to the U.S., with sales around $103 billion annually. But now, by adding automobiles to its list of possible retaliation tools, Ottawa is signaling it's ready to expand its countermeasures. The automotive sector is, honestly, one of the most deeply interwoven areas of U.S.-Canada trade. Under NAFTA and now the USMCA, vehicles and parts cross the border multiple times before reaching the consumer. An engine component might be made in Ontario, assembled in Michigan, and finished back in Canada, before being sold in the U.S. The total trade value in this sector is about $60 to $65 billion per year, which far exceeds that of steel and aluminum. Canada not only exports fully assembled vehicles, but also essential components, like transmissions, electronics, seats, dashboards, and more, to American plants. Major automakers such as Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, they've got critical facilities in Canada. Even Japanese manufacturers like Toyota and Honda rely on Canadian plants to supply the United States market. So, what happens now that Trump has raised tariffs on raw materials vital to car production? Canadian officials say this is going to directly impact the auto industry. A significant amount of the steel and aluminum used in American car factories actually originates in Canada. Tariff hikes mean increased production costs, reduced profits for United States automakers, and ultimately, higher prices for consumers. For example, the steel used in a pickup truck's frame could now be taxed at 50%, eroding margins and pushing sticker prices upward. Ottawa is now hinting that if Washington insists on these aggressive tariffs, Canada could respond by targeting automotive exports, either by slowing shipments, adding taxes, or restricting access. That would elevate the dispute into a full-blown trade war. So does Canada have the muscle to pull this off? Well, by the numbers, absolutely. With $65 billion in auto-related exports to the US, Canada really wields significant leverage, nearly double the steel and aluminum trade volume. That's why Canadian leaders believe that an automotive response could, more than compensate for losses from metal tariffs. Still, it's a complicated move. Many of the vehicles built in Canada are for American brands, so if Canada clamps down, American manufacturers and consumers will suffer most. Popular pickups, SUVs, and sedans would become scarce. Dealerships might struggle with supply and prices would soar, angering consumers and possibly hurting Trump politically. However, the strategy is risky. Disrupting auto production could backfire on Canada too. Canadian workers and factories are heavily dependent on that cross-border flow. Any retaliation could mean temporary plant closures, job losses, and economic instability at home. Canada's strategy right now is simple but bold. We're willing to take a hit if it means pushing back where it hurts the US most, rather than accept the full damage of Trump's 50% tariff on steel and aluminum. Ottawa appears ready to apply pressure in areas where the US is deeply vulnerable. For many Canadian politicians, the auto industry is the sharpest weapon in this trade standoff. If Canada brings that sector into the fight, some believe Washington could be forced to back down. This isn't happening in a vacuum. Remember, the old NAFTA deal was replaced by the USMCA, which established strict regional content requirements, like ensuring that at least 75% of a vehicle is made within North America to avoid tariffs. Canada now argues that Trump's sudden 50% tariffs directly violate the spirit of this agreement. They're saying, in effect, you're punishing us for the very steel and aluminum that your deal says should be made here.
We will start tonight with the latest punch from the U.S. President Donald Trump doubling down on steel and aluminum tariffs, which as of midnight now sit at 50%. The big question at this point, what does Canada do in response? Ontario's Premier Doug Ford wants the feds to hit back and hit back fast.
I want to make sure that we get a deal. I understand we're close to making a deal, and I want to make sure that the federal government slaps another 25% on their steel, but regards to electricity, everything's on the table right now.
And if Canada retaliates by disrupting the auto supply chain, that could put the U.S. in a contradictory position, penalizing Canadian metals while depending on Canadian auto parts under the same agreement. It's a formula that could fracture the USMCA altogether. On the American side, the auto lobby is already sounding alarms. Major automakers like Ford and GM have warned that tariffs will spike material costs, raise vehicle prices, and reduce sales. Now they're asking, what happens if Canada slashes its auto exports in response? That fear is spreading fast, as many U.S. assembly plants rely heavily on Canadian-made parts. Brands from Toyota to Chrysler are beginning to panic over possible supply disruptions. Let's not forget, Canada has previously threatened to use oil as leverage, given that it supplies roughly half of all U.S. crude imports, a trade worth over $100 billion annually. If Ottawa were to limit oil exports, American refineries would be in deep trouble. Gas prices would spike and the political fallout for Trump could be significant. Still, cutting oil would also dent Canadian revenue, so Ottawa has stopped short of confirming that move. But the automotive sector is a different battlefield. Its entire framework is built on fluid border crossings and shared production across Canada and the U.S. If Canada limits exports or raises tariffs here, it would damage itself. Yes, but it could cripple U.S. car production and trigger a severe shortage. President Trump, who prides himself on economic strength, might then face a domestic crisis over car availability and prices. Canada's strategy appears to be using that scenario as leverage, not to destroy the trade relationship, but to strengthen its position at the negotiation table. Of course, all-out escalation would come at a cost. A trade war centered on autos could wreak havoc on both economies, but Canada is positioning itself as the victim, not the aggressor, arguing that it's only responding to a provocation, Trump's sudden and extreme 50% tariffs. There's still a chance this ends in compromise. It's possible that Canada uses threats of auto retaliation or selective tariffs to pressure Washington without fully disrupting trade. In this scenario, Trump may decide to ease off the 50% steel tariffs to protect the auto industry. That would lead to long and complex diplomatic negotiations, possibly with both sides agreeing to revisions under the USMCA. But if talks fail, and Canada retaliates by applying 50% tariffs on vehicles or parts, the ripple effect will be brutal. U.S. dealerships would be hit with vehicle shortages and soaring prices. The Trump administration would likely counter by targeting other Canadian exports, dragging the North American supply chain into chaos. A more measured Canadian strategy might involve selective tariffs rather than a full block, just enough to gain bargaining power. Trump might respond by delaying or softening the full steel tariff rollout. That's the more likely middle ground scenario, though still risky given Trump's unpredictable approach. At the same time, Canada is quietly diversifying. Plans are already in motion to export more oil and LNG to Asian markets. Likewise, in autos, new partnerships with Mexico or Europe could reduce Canada's dependence on the U.S., though at the risk of lower profits and market disruption. Cutting off U.S. access completely, however, would be like shooting itself in the foot, given the scale and convenience of the American market. Ultimately, this all hinges on how far Trump is willing to push. If he stays firm on the 50% tariffs, Canada may feel compelled to retaliate harder. And back home, Prime Minister Carney is under growing pressure to act decisively, with Canadian voters demanding a strong stance. Given Trump's history of sudden policy shifts, we can't rule out a dramatic twist. Canada pulls the plug on U.S. auto supply might not just be a hypothetical headline, it could become a real turning point in this crisis. In the coming weeks, all eyes will be on official decisions out of Ottawa. Whether Canada truly pulls the auto card or just uses it to gain ground will determine if this trade clash becomes a full collapse. If this card is played hard, it could easily overshadow the original steel and aluminum tensions.
Mark Carney is turning to Europe to forge a deeper defense partnership and hopes to see significant movement by Canada Day. That's exactly 1 month from today. It comes as Canada is under pressure to spend more on the military. Later this month, NATO is expected to ask countries to dramatically boost their defense spending from 2% of the country's GDP to as much as 5%. Right now, Canada's spending sits well below the target of 2% at 1.37%.
In times like these, staying informed matters. As always, those paying attention will adapt, while those caught off guard will deal with higher prices, broken supply chains, and lost opportunities. What's your take on this growing conflict? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications for the latest updates.